Okay, so, for anyone listening who's like really into like the super fundamental questions about reality, like what is existence itself?
Yeah.
We are diving deep today.
Yeah. We're going deep.
Deep into those waters.
At the
And
deep end of the pool.
exactly. And I think this is the kind of topic that really gets at those core philosophical inquiries. Like, have you ever thought about that difference between what something is, like its essence and the fact that it exists at all?
It's so fundamental, right?
Yeah, like what is that distinction? Is it just a thought in our minds or is it something real in the world?
Yeah, it seems so simple, but
It's not.
But yeah, as soon as you start thinking about it,
You go down a rabbit hole.
you go down a rabbit hole.
And today we're going down that rabbit hole with a true philosophical heavyweight,
Yeah.
Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna.
Oh yeah, a giant.
A giant.
In the history of philosophy.
This 11th century polymath didn't just like dip his toes in philosophy. He went all in.
Yeah, he built a whole system.
He built a system.
It's very impressive.
Aimed at really trying to understand like the nuts and bolts of reality.
Right.
How it all fits together.
Very systematically too. I mean, his work is so comprehensive. It's remarkable.
For sure. And, for our listeners, who are philosophically minded, I think this is going to be like a real treat because we're going to be looking at Avicenna's Metaphysics, and that gets into those big questions about being existence, causality, God, the whole shebang.
The whole 9 yards,
Yeah.
all the big stuff.
And to guide us on this journey,
Yes.
our compass, our map,
Our trusty guide.
is going to be the Ibn Sina's Metaphysics entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Oh, a great entry.
We have a pretty good one.
Very comprehensive, very detailed.
Yeah, it covers like the whole scope of his thought,
It really does.
from his ontology, theology to his cosmology.
Ontology, yeah.
So it's like a really
A one-stop shop
a one-stop shop.
for Avicenna's metaphysics.
Right. And so our mission today is to like distill out the most like philosophically juicy parts of Avicenna's thought.
The good stuff.
The good stuff.
Yeah.
And to try to present it in a way that's like clear and engaging and hopefully sparks some, philosophical pondering on your own.
Right. Some reflection for our listeners.
Right. Because this is dense stuff.
It is dense.
We want to make it digestible.
Yeah.
We're going to provide the mental floss.
Exactly. Yeah, this is like a shortcut to understanding some really key elements of a super influential philosophical system.
Right. It's like we're giving you the cheat sheet,
Yeah,
but a good cheat sheet,
the best cheat sheet.
right? One that you can actually learn from.
That's right.
Okay, so Avicenna, right off the bat, he's not messing around.
No,
He views metaphysics as a science,
absolutely a rigorous science.
a rigorous science. He called it ilm.
Film, yes.
And he's aiming for a truly like solid understanding of reality, not just speculation.
Right. It's not just armchair philosophy for Avicenna.
No, he wants to get to the bottom of things.
He wants to build a system that really reflects the way things are.
And he's drawing a lot from Aristotle, right? Aristotle is like his homeboy.
Aristotle is the man, the OG.
But he's also bringing in some Neoplatonic ideas as well.
Yeah, he's not afraid to mix it up.
Right. He's kind of like synthesizing these different traditions.
Exactly.
And, the Stanford entry mentioned some of these Neoplatonic figures like Plotinus and Proclus.
Right.
And so we're seeing like this blending of different influences.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of blending either. He's really transforming these ideas into something new and original.
Okay, so he's not just like a copycat.
No, he's taking these ideas and he's running with them.
Right, he's putting his own spin on it.
Absolutely.
Now, he's also deeply embedded in the Arabic Islamic philosophical tradition of his time, right?
For sure, he's engaged in all the big debates of his day.
Right, and the entry mentions some of these figures like Yahya, Ibn Adi, and Al-Farabi.
Right, big names.
Big names in Islamic philosophy.
Yeah.
And also the Kalam tradition, which was this, theological school of thought.
Very influential.
Right, and so he's not just like working in isolation. He's part of this
He's in dialogue.
this vibrant intellectual community.
Absolutely. He's responding to other thinkers. He's building on their ideas. He's disagreeing with them.
It's a real conversation.
Yeah, it's a lively philosophical scene.
And, even though he's drawing from all these different sources, he's not just like rehashing old ideas.
No, not at all.
He's coming up with his own original contributions.
Right, he's pushing the boundaries of philosophical thought.
Right, and that's what makes him so fascinating, I think.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that really struck me is that he sees metaphysics as having this like dual focus.
Right.
On the one hand, it's ontology. the study of being as such.
Being qua being, as they say.
Right. What does it mean to exist?
Right.
And then on the other hand, it's theology, the study of God or the first principle.
The divine, yeah.
And he sees these two as like deeply interconnected.
Yeah, they're two sides of the same coin.
Right. And so this helps him to clarify like a question that's been bugging philosophers since Aristotle.
Oh, yeah.
What is the subject matter of metaphysics?
Right. What are we actually studying when we do metaphysics?
Right. Is it just being in general, or is it God, or is it something else?
Yeah, Aristotle himself wasn't always totally clear on this.
No, he wasn't.
But Avicenna comes in and he's like, I got this.
He's like, I figured it out.
I got you.
He's like, I'm going to systematize this.
Yeah.
So how does he do that?
So basically, Avicenna argues that the subject matter of metaphysics is the existent and its essential attributes. Right? So this firmly places it in the realm of ontology. We're studying existence as such.
Okay.
But he also maintains that the ultimate object of metaphysical inquiry, the thing we're really trying to understand, is the first principle, the ultimate source of all being, and that's where theology comes in.
Okay, so it's like ontology is the foundation.
The foundation.
But theology is the peak.
The peak, the ultimate goal.
The goal.
Yeah.
To reach that understanding of the first principle.
Exactly. And for Avicenna, you can't really have one without the other. They're inextricably linked.
Right. And so this kind of resolves that tension in Aristotle, right?
Yeah, it clarifies what Aristotle was getting at with the whole science of being qua being thing.
Right, because, Aristotle uses that phrase being qua being.
El makud bi ma huwa maksud in the original Arabic.
Right. But what does that actually mean?
Right. It's a bit cryptic.
It is. And Avicenna comes in and he's like, let me break this down for you.
Let me unpack this.
Right. And he's saying that, look, when you study being as such,
when you really get into the nitty-gritty of existence,
you inevitably end up having to think about the first principle.
Right, because you have to ask yourself, where did all this being come from? What's the ultimate source of it all?
Right, like why is there something rather than nothing?
Exactly, that's the big question.
And Avicenna is saying that question leads you straight to the first principle.
Straight to God.
So theology is not like this separate discipline that's just like off on its own. It's actually like the culmination of ontology.
The peak of the ontological mountain.
Exactly. You climb that mountain of being,
yeah.
and you end up at the summit, which is God.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Right. So it's a really elegant solution to this problem.
It really is.
Now let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah, the meat of the matter.
This is like Avicenna's signature move.
His claim to fame.
The essence-existence distinction.
The big one.
This is like his philosophical jam.
Yeah. This is where he really made his mark.
So break it down for us. What is this all about?
Okay, so Avicenna says that there's a real and fundamental difference between a thing's essence and its existence. Right. The essence is like what the thing is, its definition, its concept.
Like the whatness of a thing.
Exactly, the whatness.
Okay.
And then existence is the fact that it is...
the thatness.
The thatness, yeah.
Okay, so essence is like the blueprint.
The blueprint.
And existence is like the actual building.
The actual building coming into being.
Right, okay. I think I'm getting it.
And Avicenna argues that existence is like this primary, indefinable concept.
Okay.
You can't define it without already presupposing it.
It's like trying to explain what wet is to someone who's never felt water.
Exactly. You're already using the concept you're trying to define.
Right. It's kind of circular.
Yeah. It's like existence is just there. It's the most basic fact.
It's like the ground floor of reality.
A bedrock.
And so how does this distinction play out? Like, how does it actually work in his system?
So first off, Avicenna points out that we use the word existent in a bunch of different ways.
Okay.
Like we might say that a unicorn is an existent thing, even though it doesn't actually exist.
Right, like it exists as a concept.
Exactly. It has a mental existence.
But not a real existence.
Right, not in the actual world.
Okay.
But Avicenna is really interested in this, like, more fundamental sense of existence.
Like what it means for something to actually be out there in the world.
Right, to be a concrete reality.
Okay, so he's making a distinction between different types of existence.
Yeah, he talks about different senses of the word makud, which is the Arabic word for existent. And he identifies two main meanings.
Okay.
The first one is just the basic affirmation that something is...
like it exists, period.
Exactly. It's like saying this chair exists.
Okay.
But the second meaning is more interesting.
Okay.
He calls it the proper existence, or al-luhud alin.
Okay.
And this refers to the reality by which something is what it is.
Yeah.
It's the actuality of its essence.
So it's like... the essence is the potential,
The potential.
And the existence is the actualization of that potential.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like the essence of a tree is like its treeness.
Right, all the things that make a tree a tree.
All right, the leaves, the branches, the roots.
Yeah.
But then the existence of a particular tree is like that specific tree standing in that specific place at that specific time.
That particular instantiation of treeness.
Right. Okay, I think I'm starting to see how this works.
Yeah, it's a subtle distinction, but it's really important for Avicenna.
Now, this distinction didn't just like pop out of nowhere, right?
It has roots in earlier philosophical discussions.
Okay, so where does he get this idea from?
Well, you can see hints of it in Aristotle's work.
Oh, yeah.
Like in his Posterior Analytics and Metaphysics, he talks about the difference between the what and the if of a thing.
Right. So like the what is the essence and the if is like whether it exists or not.
Right.
Okay.
And Avicenna also draws on discussions in Islamic philosophy and theology.
Okay.
Like the works of Al-Farabi and the Mutazilite Kalam tradition.
Right. So he's building on a long tradition of thought here.
Absolutely. He's synthesizing these different strands of thought.
And then he takes it to the next level, right?
Yeah, he makes it central to his whole system.
So what's the big deal about this distinction? Why is it so important?
Well, for Avicenna, this distinction is the key to understanding the contingency of the world.
Okay.
Like, why is it that some things exist and some things don't? Why is there something rather than nothing?
Right.
And Avicenna says that it's because essences in themselves don't have existence.
Okay.
They're ontologically neutral.
Ontologically neutral. I like that.
Yeah. It's like a fancy way of saying that an essence doesn't inherently demand to exist.
Okay.
It's just what it is.
Like the essence of a unicorn is just unicornness.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that unicorns have to exist.
Right.
Okay.
And he has this famous phrase, the indifference of essence.
Indifference of essence.
Yeah, it's like the essence doesn't care whether it exists or not.
It's just chilling.
It's just vibing.
Right. Okay, I get it.
And there's this Latin formulation that captures this idea really well. Equinitas ergo in se est equinitas tantum.
Equinitas ergo in se est equinitas tantum.
Yeah, it means equinity in itself is merely equinity.
Right, so the essence of a horse
Right.
is just horseness.
Exactly.
Doesn't automatically come with existence.
Right. It's not like if you have the concept of a horse, then boom, a horse has to pop into being.
Right, like essences don't have their own built-in existence, but...
Exactly. They need something else to bring them into being.
And that's where God comes in, right?
That's where the first principle comes in.
Right, because for Avicenna, God is the only being whose essence is existence.
Right. God is pure existence.
Pure existence.
There's no distinction between what God is and that God is.
Right. It's like God is existence itself.
Exact.
And so everything else in the universe gets its existence from God.
From the first principle.
Because their essences are not enough to guarantee their own being.
That's right. They're contingent. They depend on something else for their existence.
And Avicenna is really careful to say that this composition of essence and existence in created things.
Right.
It's not like a Mariological addition.
Yeah, it's not like you take the essence and then you just slap on some existence.
Right. It's not like Lego blocks.
No, it's more intimate than that.
More fundamental.
Yeah, it's like existence is woven into the very fabric of a thing's being.
Right. And he criticizes the Platonists for thinking that it's like this simple addition.
Right, because for Plato, the forms kind of exist independently of the things that participate in them.
Right. They're like these perfect blueprints that exist in some other realm.
Exactly.
But Avicenna is saying no existence is something that's given to things by God.
Right. It's a gift.
It's a gift from the first principle.
Yeah, a continuous gift.
And he also talks about the role of consideration.
Itibar.
Right, Ibar, and how we understand essences.
Right, because we can think about essences even if they don't exist in reality.
Like we can think about unicorns.
Exactly.
Even though there are no unicorns.
Right, and Avicenna says that when we do that, we're giving them a kind of mental existence.
Okay.
But it's not the same as actual existence.
Right, it's like a shadow existence.
Yeah, a pale imitation.
Okay, so essences have this like weird status.
They do.
They're not nothing.
Right.
But they're not fully real either.
They need existence to become real.
Right. Okay, so this essence-existence distinction is really doing a lot of heavy lifting in his system.
It is. It's the foundation of his whole metaphysics.
Now let's talk about modality.
Modality. Okay.
Because Avicenna links his understanding of essence and existence to these concepts of necessity and possibility.
Right. He's saying that modality is grounded in the very nature of being.
Okay, so how does that work?
So for Avicenna, an existent being is either necessary in itself.
Necessary.
Yeah, or possible in itself.
Possible.
And these modalities are not just like arbitrary categories.
Yeah.
They're based on the relationship between a thing's essence and its existence.
Okay, so walk me through this.
Okay, so if a being's essence is such that it can't not exist, then it's necessary.
Necessary.
But if a being's essence is such that it could either exist or not exist,
Okay.
then it's possible.
Possible. Okay, so it's like built into the essence itself.
Right, it's not like something external that's imposed on the being.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so let's take the example of God.
Okay.
For Avicenna, God's essence is existence itself.
Right, pure existence.
So God can't not exist.
Right, because if God didn't exist, then God wouldn't be God.
Exactly. So God is a necessary being.
A necessary being.
But now let's take the example of a tree.
Okay.
The essence of a tree doesn't include existence.
Right, it's just treeness.
So a tree could exist or it could not exist.
Right.
It depends on whether something causes it to exist.
So a tree is a possible being.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I'm following.
And from this modal analysis, Avicenna deduces a bunch of cool stuff about the necessary existent.
Okay, like that.
Well, first of all, he argues that the necessary existent must be uncaused.
Uncaused.
Yeah, because if it had a cause, then its existence would depend on something else.
Right, and that would mean it's not really necessary.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And from that, he argues that the necessary existent must be unique.
Unique.
Yeah, there can only be one.
Okay, why is that?
Well, if there were two necessary existents,
Okay.
then either they would both have to be caused by something else, which is impossible.
Right, because they're supposed to be necessary.
Exactly. Or one of them would have to be the cause of the other.
Right, and that would mean that one of them is not really necessary.
Exactly. So there can only be one uncaused necessary being.
Okay, and he uses some examples to illustrate this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the coexistence of form and matter.
Form and matter.
Yeah, they always go together.
Right. You can't have one without the other.
Right, so they must both be caused by something else.
Something prior that unites them.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a good example.
And he also uses the example of soul and body.
Soul and body.
Yeah, they're also always found together.
Right, at least in embodied beings.
Right, and so Avicenna says that this points to a prior cause that unites them.
Okay, so the very fact that we see these pairs of things
Right.
suggests that they can't be the ultimate reality.
Exactly. There must be something deeper that explains why they exist together.
Okay. And that something deeper is the necessary existent.
The first principle.
The one uncaused
The
cause.
source of all being.
And Avicenna doesn't stop there.
No, he goes on to list a whole bunch of other attributes of the necessary existent.
Okay, hit me with them.
Okay, so the necessary existent is one simple,
Oh.
non-relative,
Non-relative.
immutable,
Wow.
non-multiple.
And not associated with anything else.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's like a whole laundry list of divine attributes.
Right, and basically what he's saying is that the necessary existent can't have any kind of complexity or limitation.
Right, because any kind of complexity or limitation would imply dependence on something else.
Right, and that would contradict its necessity.
Exactly.
Okay, so the necessary existent is like this absolutely perfect, simple, and self-sufficient being.
The ultimate reality.
And how do possible beings fit into all of this?
Well, possible beings are basically the opposite of the necessary existent.
Okay,
They're caused, they're composite, they're dependent.
depends.
They receive their existence from something else.
Right, they're not self-sufficient.
Exactly.
And this modal analysis is actually the basis for Avicenna's ontological proof for the existence of God.
Right. He's not just relying on observation or experience.
No, he's starting with the very concept of existence itself.
And he's arguing that the concept of a necessary existent is logically coherent.
Right, and that it's the only way to explain the existence of possible beings.
Exactly.
So it's a really powerful argument.
It is. It's had a huge influence on the history of philosophy.
Now, he also talks about other statuses of existence.
Oh, yeah, like priority and posteriority.
Priority and posteriority.
And richness and poverty or indigence.
Richness and poverty. Okay, what are those all about?
So basically, these statuses are all about causal dependence.
Causal dependence.
Yeah, so the necessary existent is the first cause.
Right, the uncaused cause.
So it's ontologically prior to everything else.
Ontologically prior.
Yeah, it comes first in the order of being,
Okay.
and it's also axiologically prior.
Axiologically prior.
Yeah, it's more perfect, more excellent,
Okay.
and it's absolutely rich or self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient.
It doesn't need anything else.
Right. It has everything it needs within itself.
Exactly.
Whereas possible beings
Right.
They're posterior, they come after.
And they're indigent. They need something else to exist.
They're dependent. Okay, so it's like this hierarchy of being.
Yeah, with the necessary existent at the top.
And everything else flowing down from it.
Like a cascade of being.
And this brings us to causality.
Causality, okay.
Because Avicenna also develops a cosmological argument for the first cause.
Right. He's got multiple arguments in his arsenal.
He's like a philosophical ninja.
He's got all the moves.
So how does this cosmological argument work?
Well, he starts with the idea of a causal chain.
A causal chain.
Yeah, like every event has a cause and that cause has a cause and so on.
Like a chain of dominoes.
Exactly.
And he argues that this chain can't go back infinitely.
Right, there has to be a first cause.
A first cause.
And that first cause is the necessary existent.
Okay, but why can't the chain go back infinitely?
Well, Avicenna has a really cool argument for this.
Okay, let's hear it.
He says that the cause of a thing's existence exists along with it.
Okay.
So the cause is not just like a one-time event.
Right, it's not like striking a match, then the match is lit.
Exactly. It's more like the sun shining on a plant.
Okay.
The sun has to keep shining for the plant to keep living.
Right, it's an ongoing dependence.
Exactly.
Okay, so the cause is continuously sustaining the effect.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how does this prove that there has to be a first cause?
Well, Avicenna argues that if there were an infinite regress of causes,
Okay.
then all of those causes would have to exist simultaneously
But-
because they're all sustaining each other.
Right, because each cause depends on the cause before it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then he says that this would mean that there's no ultimate explanation for the existence of the whole chain.
Okay.
It would be like an infinite series of mirrors reflecting each other
Okay.
with no original image to start with.
Right, so it's like a cosmic Ponzi scheme.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. So Avicenna is saying that there has to be a first cause
A being that exists in and of itself.
that doesn't depend on anything else for its existence.
That's the only way to make sense of the causal chain.
Okay, and this first cause is God.
The necessary existence.
Okay, now he also has another argument for the necessary existent,
Oh, yeah, in his Kitab al-Ishard.
the Kitab al-Ijoret, or remarks and admonitions.
Right.
And this one is more like a purely a priori argument.
Yeah, it doesn't rely on any empirical observations.
That's it.
Based on the very concept of being.
Okay.
So Avicenna distinguishes between beings that have necessary existence in themselves
Okay.
and beings that have possible existence.
Possible existence.
Right. And he argues that there has to be at least one being with necessary existence.
Okay, why is that?
Well, if everything had only possible existence,
Yeah.
then it would be possible for nothing to exist.
Okay.
But clearly something does exist.
Right, we're here.
Exactly. So there must be at least one being that can't not exist.
A being whose existence is necessary.
Right. And that being is God.
Okay, so both of these arguments,
The cosmological argument and the ontological argument.
they both point to the same conclusion.
The necessity of a first cause.
Okay, now let's talk about creation.
Creation. Okay.
Because Avicenna has a very specific way of understanding how God creates the world.
Yeah, he distinguishes between absolute creation
Absolute creation,
and creation in time.
creation in time.
And he says that God's creation is absolute creation.
Absolute creation.
Okay, what does that mean?
So absolute creation means that God creates the world out of nothing.
Out of nothing.
There's no pre-existing matter or anything like that.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that there was a time when the world didn't exist.
Okay, so it's not like a temporal beginning.
Right. It's more like an ontological dependence.
Ontological dependence.
So the world is eternally dependent on God for its existence.
Okay.
But it's still created because it wouldn't exist without God.
Right, so it's like a continuous creation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
God is constantly sustaining the world in being.
Okay. And he
Right.
uses an analogy to explain this, right?
Yeah, the analogy of the hand moving a key.
The hand moving a key.
So the hand is the cause and the key is the effect.
Okay.
And they both move at the same time.
But the hand is still the cause of the key's movement.
Right, because the key wouldn't move without the hand.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like God is the hand and the world is the key.
Right, God is constantly moving the world.
Okay, and he emphasizes that this creation happens without any intermediary.
Right, there's no instrument, no time involved.
So it's like a direct creation.
Yeah, God just wills the world into being.
And it's happening all the time.
All the time.
Okay, that's a pretty wild idea.
It is. It's a very different way of thinking about creation.
Now, how does the world actually come into being? Like, what's the process?
So this is where the Neoplatonic idea of emanation comes in.
Emanation.
Festi.
Facial. Okay, what is that?
So emanation is like a flowing forth.
A flowing force.
Yeah, it's the way that the multiplicity of the world comes from the unity of God.
Okay.
And it starts with God's self-knowledge.
God's self-knowledge.
Yeah, so God knows himself perfectly.
Okay.
And this act of self-knowledge produces the first intelligence.
The first intelligence?
Yeah, it's like the first emanation from God.
Okay. And this intelligence is still like part of God in a way, right?
Yeah, it's like a reflection of God's mind.
Okay.
But it's also distinct from God.
Okay.
Because it has both essence and existence.
Right, whereas God is just pure existence.
Exactly.
And this first intelligence then produces the second intelligence.
Right.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's like a chain of emanations.
A chain of emanation.
And each intelligence is less perfect than the one before it.
Okay.
Because it's further removed from God.
Right. It's like a dimmer and dimmer reflection.
Exactly.
And this process continues until you get to the 10th intelligence.
The 10th intelligence.
Which is the agent intellect.
The agent intellect.
And the agent intellect is responsible for creating the material world.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the link between the spiritual realm and the physical realm.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's a pretty elaborate system.
It is. It's very intricate.
But it all comes back to this idea of emanation.
Right. Everything.